right now we're going to talk about entering the downgoing Kali Yuga, and here we kind of talked about this area. So now we'll head down, and this gets very interesting because in the history of religions we separate the types of religious manifestations. We think of three types, and it's crucial to understanding this Iron Age transition. And we talk about sacred acts, sacred words, sacred places when we talk about religion. There's three different ways of, all religions talk about sacred acts, that ritual kind of thing. Then you have sacred words, like scriptures, and like in India you have the special intonation of words and things. Sacred places. All religions have sacred places. But according to looking at history, my professor at UCLA talked a lot about this. He could never understand, and this is kind of what's finally made sense to me because of him questioning this. Why did everybody in the whole ancient world change from ritual type of behavior of sacred acts and switch over to ethics-based religion and sacred words? Why did that happen? And it happened during the Axis age. Karl Jaspers, German philosopher, German-Swiss philosopher, invented the term axial age, Achsenzeit. Like axial, it's kind of this special time where all this stuff happened. And my professor was always wondering, why did all this stuff switch over? And the thing is, the scholars talk about the previous type of religions as cosmic maintenance religions, doing sacred type of acts to keep the crops going and to keep the universe going and all this stuff. We had this responsibility with the cosmos. We interacted with the cosmos. And then pretty soon people just didn't seem to get it anymore. Like it didn't make sense. And so then we switched to ethical things and to words, to sacred words rather than sacred acts. And why did that happen? And so it got me thinking, because if we really understand this whole concept of the Yuga cycle, then when you're going downhill here and you finally get to the point where you lose track of this inner attunement with God and with nature, which is natural to the people in this area. Remember we talked about the spiritual experiences and the experiences of oneness and all that. That's natural in the higher ages. Well, in Kali Yuga, you're suddenly stuck in the body, and the body is the only thing that's real, and you begin to question all these things, and you have no more attunement. And so if you're going from this attunement to body consciousness, you suddenly have no more inner guidance. So that's why Confucius, for instance, said in the Golden Age, people didn't need guidance. They didn't need sacred texts or words to guide them, because it all came from within. It was natural. You're in attunement with the universe. But when you lose all that, then you need Bibles, you need all these words to help you along, and words from wise people, because you don't know what's up anymore. And so, the scholars thought, the people were advancing, they're finally getting aware of ethical things and getting away from all this jumbo of ritual. Well, it's not. It's really the opposite. It's when you lose the attunement, then you need help, and that's when you have to learn ethics from somebody to teach you how to behave. And Confucius said that very well in his Analects somewhere, that and Hesiod also, the Greek ancient Greek writer, that you need this outer guidance from people because you lost that inner attunement. And the other thing is that when you have that inner attunement, then you're able to work with the crops, your consciousness blends with all these other things to control them, to work with them. And you have this spiritual attunement so that you really do go out into the consciousness, goes out into the crops and works with the roots to strengthen them, and all this energy work that we're starting to do now. We're not quite large enough yet. Like we help each other. We do Reiki healing and all these kind of things. Yeah, but as time goes on, like I know you've worked with plants and make plants grow and things, and other people use electromagnetic fields. But the whole point is that when you start being able to use this energy and you start to focus it, and your consciousness is deep enough in attunement with everything around you, you'll just, like it might be your job to take care of a whole field of plants and just infuse them with energy to make them grow. And so this cosmic maintenance is coming back. It's making sense to us. When these people lost all that and were just stuck in the body, then this rituals became meaningless, right? And so when they became meaningless, that's why at that point the new religion had to be given a new teaching of how to behave and how to deal with this age. And that's what we're going to see here. Suddenly we're turning to ethics, and they call it the epithization. So from cosmic maintenance to words and morality. Zoroastrianism came along, started focus on good versus evil, life based on moral choices, called it epithization. Everything understood in terms of moral behavior. and Jainism of Mahavira came along, and the Jains in India. He talked about ahimsa, that is nonviolence, to avert the violence in Kali Yuga, to help us with that. And Mahatma Gandhi took a lot, learned a lot from Mahavira, from Jainism, in his teachings. So Gandhi talked a lot about that, ahimsa. And the other one statement that Mahavira talked about was anekantvada, many-sidedness, because he knew Kali Yuga was coming, and so he made Jainism talks about the 4 ages as well, about the yugas, and he talked about assertions of dogma, of certainty of dogma, are an indication of spiritual arrogance. Many-sidedness is the non-violence of the mind, an attitude of humility and constant questioning of one's own certainties. Unless enlightened, we have much to learn, so we should remain many-sided. So this anekantvada was very important to him. And so people, you treat everyone with respect. And he knew that would be a challenge in the Dark Age, between religions. I haven't even mentioned these older religions, the cosmic maintenance religions. None of them were proselytizing, like you better join us if you want to be saved or anything. It didn't exist, that concept. Because in that time, people were just in attunement with the inner world. And in fact, in the Mohenjo-Darapa civilization in India, the Indus Valley civilization, they didn't even find temples. Because in those higher ages, they lived in this inner attunement. They didn't need an outer temple. Well, you always have sacred places anyway somewhere, but the sacredness is inside of yourself. That's where you find it, right? And so so they didn't even have temples, which surprised me in India, And and in the Agama Sutras from Jainism, they talk about the golden age. People do not need ethics or religion since they manifested those traits through inner realization. Gradually, as the ages decline, ethics and religion are introduced because people need guidance. So you see it everywhere. They all knew about this. And I mentioned Confucius already with his morality, and even after he taught that at the highest point of the Kali Yuga, trying to maintain this height, it didn't last long. Like 100 years after Confucius, they invented legalism, which says man by nature evil and government has to rule by force and fear to keep order. So that's the Kali Yuga approach, stepping in after the just ethics of Confucius. So you see this happening and everywhere. So Brahmanism switches to Hinduism. You've all heard of Brahmanism, which is the focus on ritual acts, on sacrifices and things, and and those were like the Brahmanas and things. I'll get more into that later, but they, if you like, the Shatapada Brahmana, I did a lot of that work in my doctoral work, and it's like a 6-volume work, and stuff will put you to sleep. It's so boring. Then you do this and you do that, but you have the same kind of thing when you read a book on plasma physics, or you read a book on how to work with a laser, how to build a laser. Very, very precise, And so whatever they were doing, we don't understand anymore. But it was this inner precise technology of the soul, and we've forgotten that. And so again, the word karma was a ritual action, but then it was translated to moral action in Hinduism. Again, this ethicization of rebirth of personal moral responsibility, because they needed that kind of guidance. And Judaism, remember, they stopped, the temple got destroyed, and they also stopped their sacrifices because they just didn't make sense. People couldn't relate to it. They forgot the inner attunement and didn't know how to do it. In the New World, all the ancient civilizations there, they stayed with a lot longer, but you can see what happened with it, like the Aztecs, not very nice how they dealt with sacrifice, because they may have known some of these things, but they lost what it really was really for, and it got to be pretty nasty, in some ways. So, and then the other thing is, at that time, Buddhism came to break up the caste system, which was becoming hereditary, to focus more on equality, which was very important for Kali Yuga, and to stop the focus on ritual was no longer viable. And so Buddhism and Jainism broke off with the authority of the Vedas for one simple reason. In Kali Yuga, Vedas were no longer understandable. And I always wondered why Buddhism and Jainism didn't accept the authority of the Vedas. And then I realized later, well, this is Kali Yuga, the Dark Age, and people just don't understand the Vedic stuff. It's way too advanced, very, very deep. And so why try to teach it and focus on it when the people can't make any sense of it? And then Taoism also goes from empty ritual to a deeper aspect for those who were deeper than just the Confucian approach. So there was a lot done there, and they may have had some of that knowledge, but it's of the ritual, but it disappeared. So religions still have some types of ritual, but not like the way it was before. And as I mentioned before, China and India alone survived through Kali Yuga, through the downgoing and upward going Kali Yuga. But they took a pretty good hit too, but they're still there, and you can see how much is preserved in terms of, that's why we're talking about all this Indian approach to the Yugas, because they've kept a lot of this alive. There's a lot was destroyed during the Muslim invasions, Islamic invasions, after 1200 AD or so. And then in this descending Iron Age, Plato and Aristotle reduced the deep intuitive wisdom of Parmenides to the logic of syllogism. And then Plato, the follower of Pythagoras and Orphic mysteries, he knew what he was doing. He set the stage for the Iron Age. And a new culture, as I mentioned, doesn't happen by accident. And so he kind of, like I'll talk a little more about it, but I mentioned Hesiod further before, the Greek poet and scholar, 700 BC, right at the start of that downgoing dark age, wrote about the ages of man at this time. So just like in India, there was an attempt not to lose the knowledge of the great year right at the juncture of the descending Kali age. So in the ancient Greeks, transitioned from a higher age of traders and merchants, such as the Carthaginians, Nyaya, logic, remember we talked about that system of Indian philosophy that reflects the dark age. Logic becomes more important than inner vision. So later Greeks, by and large, no longer able to comprehend the deeper truths that the Apollonian priests represented. In Peter Kingsley's brilliant book, In the Dark Places of Wisdom, he actually makes Plato sound like the bad guy. Plato and Aristotle reduce the deep intuitive wisdom of Parmenides to a reason-oriented approach, the logic of the syllogism. Again, all men are mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal, and my favorite one, all things are relative, some relatives are things, my relatives took all my things. And so, see, Plato tuned it down to apply to what people could understand. That's what was really important. Due to Plato's overshadowing influence on civilization, we have to realize he knew what he was doing. Of course he knew, because I read you that quote where he, at the beginning last time, of the Egyptian priest talking to Solon about Atlantis and about all these things. He actually knew a lot of these things still, but he realized that for the people in Kali Yuga, he had to, and people that no longer had the attunement, he gave them something that they could use, guidance. And even Plato was no longer viable by the bottom of the age. Plato's Academy closed at this point here because people couldn't even understand him anymore, even though he tried to tone it down. So Plato had deeper roots. Socrates went to higher states of consciousness, and Socrates' teacher Diotima was a priestess of the mystery schools. The Greeks in time of Plato were in the Satya sub-yuga of the descending Kali age. That is, if you subdivide these four ages into each age, then you could say this Kali Yuga had this like a period of a golden portion, a silver portion, a bronze portion, and a dark portion. Even in each age, you could subdivide them up. And one of the Vedic scholars thought of that, and it's very kind of appropriate. So we're kind of in the Kali portion here of the ascending Dvapara Yuga until the end of this century. That's why we're still having a lot of trouble, even though we're in the Bronze Age. And so here, let's see, so that was kind of like the highest portion of Kali Yuga, where these visionaries came in and kind of gave us guidance to keep us going. And then Peter Kingsley, I also want to mention one more time, they talk about the underworld in a lot of these ancient texts, and Peter Kingsley clarifies like Pluto being the lord of the underworld as something negative, but it's the place where seeds germinate, and Pluto actually means wealth. So that's where things come to fruition. There's a lot of power in that underworld, so to say, and so it's worth reading some of his insights. And then coming to the Bible, you wonder, does the Bible have anything to say about the Yugas? And surprisingly, there are a few things. I already mentioned the book of Job earlier, talking about God telling Job, "Canst thou bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades?" Like, can you hold God telling Job, "You're not like me. You can't keep the world in the golden age where the good influence of the Pleiades are, primary. And but I as God have designated that you go through all these ages. And and then here the biblical reference, this kind of more general one in Ecclesiastes, to everything there's a season and a time to every purpose under heaven. So talking about the different ages, but it's not very clear there. But then in the book of Daniel, things get real interesting, and Walter made me aware of this, Walter Cruttenden. Here it's Daniel saying, "Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay." And the book of Daniel was written in Aramaic, Chaldean, which is a language of the Babylonians. It's actually a dialect of Aramaic and Hebrew. Daniel was a slave who had come to be known to the king as a seer. So the reference to the great year is unmistakable. The great image is the great year in the dream. Not only does Daniel mention the four ages by their Greek metallic names, gold and silver, bronze and iron, he also puts them in the right order, as always. The golden age is mentioned first and put on top of the image, the head. Then the silver is a little lower, the breast and arms. Then brass or bronze, lower still, belly and thighs. Finally, the Iron Age and the lowest portion of the great image. So have the right ages with the right values in the right order. And then it says, this is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So here Daniel seems to be telling the king who has the dream that as a king he symbolizes power and the strength and glory. He expressed to the king that a true king should have dominion over the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heavens. He also has the consciousness, the head of gold, that comes with the higher age or golden age. And then after thee shall arise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. So he further says to the king that they are in a descending age, because after him shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, the next lower age, followed by another decline to the third kingdom of brass, a bronze age, correctly numbered as the third age in descending order. Daniel refers to the all-pervasive rule of inferior ignorance in the lower ages, as manifest in all the facets of society during those times. He goes on to tell the king later in the story that God's kingdom or the golden age will rise up again. Words of Daniel to the king brought a perspective that gave great joy, for though civilization declined, they also rise up again. There was hope. So it's pretty amazing to see that in the book of Daniel. And then Jesus comes along and tries to go beyond the Iron Age limitations, the true meaning of being born again. We have this born again concept in Jesus, and you have the twice born in India, and this refers to this. First you're born as a baby, but your second birth, your spiritual birth, it's not your baptism, it's really when you are initiated and get like a permanent state of spiritual awareness. And so as we go further into this new age, more and more people will have that permanent kind of awareness of spirit. And that's going to be more, like completely common here, and everybody has it there, but to different levels. But it's this idea in meditation and making these efforts, eventually come to the point where that sense of spirit remains with you at all times and never goes away. And that's being born again, or the second birth. And Jesus spoke about that as being so important. And the Iron Age religions forget about enlightenment and focus on heaven instead. Kind of funny how that happened, that both Christianity and Islam, being started in the Dark Age, had to kind of focus on the things people could understand. And so the idea of total enlightenment kind of seemed impossible to most people, so they just thought, well, you go to a better place, and you die and things. So Jesus shows up halfway through the descending Iron Age here, because that's 500 AD right here. So Jesus shows up around here in this area, and so he's still got a ways of some years of Kali Yuga to go, which is rough, and about 500 years. He tried to give people what he could to uplift them, but he also gave the disciples deeper teachings for those who could understand it. And so he tried to teach something that would focus on doing good and activities, prayer and that sort of thing that would generate enough desire for people to get ahead, to make a spiritual effort, where it's very difficult in those times. And they're very violent times. I'll get into that too. But I was surprised too that around 300 AD, around here in Kali Yuga, after Christianity was born, there was this problem between the Nicene Christians, more in the West, and then the Arian Christians. There's only one letter difference. Gibbon in his book, Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, it says it's really homoousios, homoiousios. Just one letter made the difference between life and death for a lot of people, and they had such violent confrontations. They found the corpses, 120 men and women in a church that had fought to their death because some were Arian, some were Nicene Christians, and they just, it's a lot of violence going on, and just seems hard to believe to us. We don't care about those things anymore because we're not concerned about little quibbles and wording. We're interested in having an experience of God in our age. So I also want to mention briefly reincarnation, which can be lost in Kali Yuga in the Dark Age, and this is kind of part and parcel of this whole concept of moving upward and having, eventually gaining enlightenment. And one passage in the New Testament, Jesus said, "If ye therefore be perfect, I will make thee a pillar in the temple of my God, and ye shall go no more out." It says once you've perfected yourself, you don't have to go back out into the round of birth and death and going through this creation. And so many of the early Christians accepted reincarnation. Some of the church fathers, such as Origen and Clement of Alexandria in the 3rd century. And interesting to me, St. Jerome, 5th century, believed in reincarnation, and he translated the Greek Bible into Latin. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Vulgate. The Vulgate was the Bible of the Western world, until the King James came around for Protestants and things. But the Vulgate was the Latin Bible of the Western world, and that was translated by Saint Jerome, who believed in reincarnation. So it's just interesting. And then what's even more amazing to me is that reincarnation was declared a heresy in 553 AD by the Second Council of Constantinople. And now that's half a millennium after Jesus established Christianity. So for half a millennium, for 500 years, reincarnation was part of a lot of Christian way of thinking, and then suddenly say, okay, no more. This is a heresy now. You can't do it anymore. And, kind of makes you think, that's kind of interesting. And they did it not because reincarnation didn't make sense. They just felt like if we give people only one life and focus on one life, then you'll make a bigger effort, because you figure, oh, well, I got another life, so I don't have to, make such a big effort, in my moral life or something. And which doesn't make sense, because if you don't make an effort, might have a kind of lousy next life if you're not very good, So, but anyway, they made that rule, and to me it was interesting that Padre Pio, how many have heard of Padre Pio? Wonderful saint, he passed away in 1968. I have a lot of his books and things. I love his life and things, and remarkable. Did so many incredible miracles, and one of the people that went to see him said, what about reincarnation? And he, instead of saying, it's false doctrine or something, no, very carefully he said, it's not part of Catholic doctrine, so don't worry about it, right? So that's a very interesting answer to me. And in fact, one of people I knew told me in Self-Realization Fellowship, his friend had gone to see Padre Pio, and it was at a time when there were so many people going to see him that you had to be Catholic to go see Padre Pio. And when he went in to see him in Italy, in Pietrelcina there, in the little village, first thing he told Padre Pio, he said, "I'm sorry, Padre Pio, I'm not Catholic, but I just had to see you." And Padre Pio looked at him and he said, "You just follow your guru and you'll be fine." Isn't that amazing? He knew nothing about him, and he knew right away who his teacher was, his guru, and And so that's what the saints, they all agree, in all the different religions. And so I mentioned the very idea of liberation is lost and downgraded to going to heaven in Kali Yuga. And even though there remain liberated saints in both traditions, but people didn't fully understand it. They feel a little suspect. Why spend all this time in union with God or whatever? It's been kind of lost or misunderstood. And now, hopefully this will all come back, and people will understand. And that's also why Paramahansa Yogananda came to the West, to kind of fulfill that part of Christianity, to get people to understand these deeper aspects that they've forgotten. And then in this descending Iron Age, the Roman Empire, the Chinese Han Dynasty, and the Indian Gupta Empire all came to an end near the bottom of the Kali Age. So they all ended, and they declined due to barbarian invasions, less capable rulers, economic stagnation, disease, unwillingness of citizens to serve in the army, tax evasion, all these things. The Romans weren't as innovative in inventing machinery as the Han Dynasty, since they depended on slaves to do things. The Chinese did not depend on slaves for labor. They were very minor as house servants. So that's kind of an interesting difference. But China's fall lasted 350 years. The Roman fall, in part due to Han pressure on Germanic tribes. And really, I should say, the fall of Rome, you have to take that with a grain of salt too, because the Eastern Empire kept going till 1453 or so. I'll get into that a little more. But Rome was founded around 700 before the Common Era BCE, and the Roman Republic from 500 BCE for 500 years. So the Roman Republic was the highest form of Roman, government. And then after 500 years, around the time of Caesar, Then you had the 500 years of Roman Empire. And the Republic was the best government possible in the highest part of this descending Kali Yuga. A blessing made possible, through like more advanced souls. Then after 500 years of Kali, these concepts no longer viable. The armies were now in control of the government. Violence rather than Roman law became the basis, even though some of it continued with some decent emperors through the Pax Romana around 185 of the Christian era, a common era. But not until 100 BC was there political murder for the first time in Roman history. So 100 BC, remember Caesar, the first political murder. From then, a lot of violent ends of rulers through the bottom of the Kali Yuga. And later, Roman and Han dynasty was greater selfishness, short-sightedness in the people and the emperors, according to historians. Deterioration in morality and morale. The Colosseum entertainment and having to get foreigners to serve in the army, since Romans didn't want to do it anymore. Now, one interesting thing from the book, The Yugas, I took this from here to give you an idea on the destruction taking place. We already know that all these ancient civilizations disappeared and people didn't even know Egypt existed. All these great civilizations, it's all lost. So 527 BC, the Persians burned the Egyptian temples and papyri. In 490 BC, the Persians destroyed literary works of Athens. Then 330 BC, Alexander the Great in Persepolis in Persia destroys volumes of the Magi. And then 214 BC, the Chinese Emperor Qin Shi Huangdi has all the books in China burnt. And of the Persepolis, he had destroyed 12,000 volumes of the Magi. That's a lot of knowledge that we wish we'd had now. And the Chinese emperor to destroy all the books in China, burn them all. I mean, can you imagine? Why would someone do that? That's what happened in these dark ages. People don't respect these ancient things anymore. In 146 BC, the Romans destroyed 500,000 Phoenician scrolls at Carthage. Then in 52 BC, Julius Caesar destroys the library at the Druid College. And 250 AD, library at Pergamum destroyed by zealous Christians. 272 AD, the main library of Alexandria destroyed by Romans. 391 AD, Theophilus levels the daughter library at Alexandria. I mean, it's horrible. And there's this one wonderful scholar in the library of Alexandria, one of the great woman scholars. And the Christians just saw her in her carriage going down the street, and they pulled her out of the carriage and beat her to death because she wasn't a Christian. I mean, horrible the way these people behaved. And I don't want to go into some of those details, but life was very different in those times. And our histories of these times are imperfect. Few places where men could read, write, and little encouragement to write. Like an age of war and robbery, famine and pestilence. There was such a widespread collapse of civilization that it doesn't conform to the Darwinian model of history adhered to by many traditional archaeologists. But now many multidisciplinary scholars are beginning to recognize, that these things have to change the way we've been looking at history. In 500 AD, that's right here, the end of the downgoing age, and now we start the 12,000-year upward-going cycle with the upward-going Kali Yuga. So there's a little more positive energy, but it's still Kali Yuga. It's still the dark age. By this time, I mean, here, this is the end of the 12,000 years, and nobody knew anything about this anymore. Nobody knew the Egyptian pyramids existed. Nobody knew about the Persian Empire. People had just lost pretty much everything. The closing of Plato's Academy, pretty dark times. All the megalithic cultures throughout Europe and Asia fell. Their builders are unknown to us. We know nothing about them. The Amazon cultures and unremembered cultures in the Americas also gone beyond recognition. The Mesopotamian cities of Sumer, Akkad, Babylon, Indus Valley, many others around the world vanished from memory. People didn't even know in this whole time until we got in the last 200 years that we rediscovered all this, because we're in the upgoing age, but these people had forgotten everything. Only towards the end of the ascending Iron Age did the Greeks reappear in force in the Italian and European Renaissance, and only then for the first time were they studied for themselves rather than for theological reasons. Then plague with widespread lack of sanitation. Castles had no toilets, average lifespan of 30 years. So the lack of sanitation is a real sign of Kali Yuga, of the Dark Age. And I mentioned castles had no toilets. Frederick Barbarossa held a special meeting with all the princes in Europe, or like a special meeting, and the wooden floor collapses, and many of the nobility drowned in the cesspool of human waste had collected underneath, because people just go anywhere in the castle. That's why it was so important, like Columbus, when he went to try to find the new route to India, so he get incense. Can you imagine with the smell? They wanted incense to kind of cover up some of this horrible smell. And there are many other examples of this. The medieval Europe, the streets were filled up with human waste thrown out of windows and doors into the streets. And so you always looked up to make sure nobody was dumping anything. And then in Paris and other some of the cities, they actually kept records of like how it took like 30 cartloads of human manure or 50 or 100 cartloads of human manure to clear a street, like in in the town, because of people throwing the waste into the street. It was not becoming unpassable, and so you imagine having that job, shoveling. It's another bad thing about Kali Yuga, and no wonder, like fleas and bed bugs were the norm, and songs are still sung about. That's what I know, a German song about bed bugs, that we learned as a kid, And women wore special high shoes, these high elevator kind of shoes, so when they stepped out of their carriages, they wouldn't get their feet into human refuse, to go into the house, I mean, can you imagine that kind of life? And is it any wonder that the Black Death killed half the population? And somebody was it Denmark or Holland, how they had all the canals and things there. They opened up the sluice gates and just washed the whole town out, and they didn't suffer from the Black Death. They had some kind of smart thinking there. And yet when we go back to the previous Bronze Age, we do see toilets. I talked about the Minoan civilization in Crete, 1500 BC. The palace in Knossos had 1,500 rooms. Imagine that, 1,500 rooms, 4 stories high, over 5 acres. But they had plumbing engineers who devised a drainage system with lavatories, sinks, and manholes. Pipes had perfect socket joints, tapered, that the narrow end of one pipe fixed tightly into the broad end of the next one. That's 3,500 years ago, right? The tapering sections allowed a jetting action to prevent accumulation of sediment. They even had a flushing water closet, flushed by rainwater or by water held in cisterns. But when do we see? So that's like around here, this time in last Vapara Yuga, last Bronze Age. Next time we see flushing toilets is in the transition. It's a transition period here, 200-year transition into our age. It's 1777, when Alexander Cummings built the first water closet. So the infant deaths and many children dead by age of 10, they wouldn't even give children a name until it had gotten a certain age, because so many children died, at that in infancy, and it would be pretty tough living that way, when you lost most of your children. I think you had to have at least five or seven children to make sure that at least one of them lived to be an adult. It'd be pretty hard on a family or on a mother to see most of their kids die, So very hard times. We forget these things. The average lifespan was considered to be only 30. And the average lifespan in each yuga is the length of the transition period. Remember we went over the transition periods, like in Kali Yuga it's 100. So they're saying in ancient India, they said that the average life expectancy in Dark Age is maximum life expectancy is 100 years in this age. In this age it goes up to 200 years. And already here we're just barely into this 100 years, fully into this age, and people are already, I forget, like my father died at age 102, and I found out there are like, I don't know, was it 10,000 or more people that live to be over 100? And it's changing rapidly. We expect people to live to be at 200 here in this age. And then you get here, they expect to live around 300, and then here 400. So when you have in the Bible Methuselah living to be 1,000 years or something, you begin to understand those are other ages, different ages. So, and then interesting, this professor of criminology estimates that medieval kings were 700 times more likely to die than a commoner. 14 of the 15 kings of Northumbria were either murdered or killed in battle. And the average American now lives far better than the kings of the Dark Ages. Like we can listen to concerts and rock music in our home, every type of food available, instant communication across the globe. I mean, the things we have now, it's like the kings of India or Europe in the Dark Ages could only dream about, So things have changed remarkably, and that's only really been in the last 100 years, that's happened. Now that we're in this age, and imagine the Dark Ages: no chocolate, no coffee, no tomatoes, no corn, no potatoes, no sugar until recently. Food was good, but quite different from what we know now. And but no stoves, no refrigeration. Imagine. At the beginning of last century, as a kid, we were starting to get refrigerators. But my parents, of course, all you used ice in your refrigerator. And interestingly enough, I should mention that when I went to Henry David Thoreau's Walden Pond, I visited, and the most interesting thing I found out is that the lake, the Walden Pond, they had a train, a locomotive train track that goes from Boston Harbor to Walden Pond. And they explained the reason that they would load the ice from Walden Pond onto the train, take it to the ships in the harbor, and those ships went to supply the India with ice drinks and things. So the ice would be in the bottom holds of the ship and go like England and India, to provide them with ice. Well, in India they need the ice, and England probably not as much. But so Thoreau got all his knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita in India, but then the ice went back to India, from Walden Pond. So, but the travel in the Dark Ages, they have this 1:723 ratio. I've heard of that. So something that takes 23 days travel by foot would take 7 days on horseback and 1 day on ship. So it gives you some idea of how they traveled and how they got around. And you imagine what we do now, when an astronaut can go around the world, entire globe in, 90 minutes or something like that.